This is my first time seeing the film. I'm really glad that I got to see it just before we can speak about it, because it's totally new to me, even though I've seen iterations of it probably for the last 20 years. And little clips here and there. This is such a triumph. I just want to say, first of all, Mazal Tov to both of you. It's extraordinary what you've done. We're going to have a few minutes of conversation up here together. I'm Rabbi Sharon Brous. I'm now an old friend of both Sandi and Amichai. And we're going to talk a little bit together, and then we'd love to take a couple of questions from you folks tonight, and then we'll close the evening together. So Amichai and Sandi and I know each other from Reboot. It's been many, many years. And so much of this journey I've witnessed from the other coast. And it is extraordinary to see these chapters of your life captured in the most artful and beautiful way. And so I want to say to both of you, first of all, Sandi, Yasher Koach, really, it is so moving and stirring to see how you have chosen to tell this story. And Amichai, your willingness to be so vulnerable and to share this much of yourself with us and with the world is quite extraordinary. So I am really, really deeply moved by you. Thank you. Okay, there's so much here to unpack. I'm gonna think about big themes of self-discovery, of tension between the individual and the collective, of your duty or responsibility to the broader community. I want to think about and talk about brothers and what it means that your father's defining story of his life was his responsibility to his brother, and the way that you and your brother have navigated this journey and the arc that he's been on, which in many ways parallels the arc that you've been on with him. Where shall we start?
First of all, thank you for being here, Sharon. It's such an honor and really a profound pleasure after all these years. And I want to thank you all for being here. Thank you, LA. It's very moving to be here and to be with Sandi, this incredible friend and amazing storyteller on this astounding journey. After one of the first screenings in the summer, somebody who watched the film commented on the brothers theme and said, actually, your story begins with Cain and Abel. Like the story of brothers begins all the way with Genesis, and then begins with your father and his brother, and then you and your brother, and there's something very biblical. And the fact that the model of brotherhood that we inherited is a binary one that's broken. It's one brother is the heir and the other brother is the spare. And we're now in the despair of brothers not getting along. And my brother Benny and I have had plenty of speed bumps, and we mostly get along, but we've worked through a lot of it. And so if our brotherly story on any level is a beginning of the repair story of the brotherhood narrative we've inherited, that will be a big blessing.
Sandi, can we take several steps back, and maybe you can talk a little bit about the project and when you first started shooting this 21 years ago, long before several of these rounds of war and devastation in Gaza, before rabbinical school, before interfaith marriage from Amichai. What were you hoping to capture, and did you ever envision that this was going to be a project of a lifetime?
I was so entranced by Rebbetzin Hadassah. I mean, That was really, I was coming off of, how many people here have seen Trembling Before God? Okay. So I was really coming off Trembling, which was about Hasidic and Orthodox Jews who were lesbian or gay. So I was coming off of Trembling Before God, which is about Hasidic and Orthodox Jews that are lesbian or gay. That was a whole other journey. But, in that time, I became more Orthodox. And I, started studying Torah every week with a Hasidic gay man. I was doing Shabbat with the Orthodikes. People love that name. It's definitely one of the best names for an organization. So, I think that I was coming off of having really, that movie became a movement. And that created a tipping point in Judaism. And it opened so many doors for families, for rabbis, for communities, including Amichai's brother, including Amichai's mother and father, and including the world that this film springs from. So, but I myself needed another portal into Judaism. I needed to go back to the world that Amichai had created. So there was a parallel between the counterculture and the storytelling and the Hadassah, and also what I was seeking as a Jew in the next journey, the next chapter of my journey. So this film really began there, as we were, didn't know where it was going to go, but we were just in the wigs and the mask and the performance and the deep Torah of it all.
And I actually think on one level, it began at Reboot. Because the Reboot network, that is I can't tell you more about it because I'll have to kill you, but it's sort of a Jewish cultural mafia, and there's quite a few of us here tonight, where I started performing Hadassah because it was a network that didn't welcome Jewish ritual overtly back in the early 2000s. We could talk about Jewish culture, but the organizers didn't really want to do Jewish ritual. People were so allergic to religion and don't talk about God, and it will look like something from Federation. So they, but I said, fine, I'll do Havdalah, I'll do the end of Shabbat ritual, but I'll do it in drag. They're like, that's great. Do a drag show. And then through the drag, I could actually start bringing ritual. And so you and I and other rabbis started being involved with that in other ways of saying, actually, we can get over our allergy to the way religion doesn't work and figure out how it can work. And sometimes it's through the scaffolding of humor and drag, and other times through seriousness and involvement. But that was one of the scaffoldings, and I think I remember you coming to me and I was like, wait, who is she? Let's do more.
I want to talk about Hadassah for a moment, if we can. You know, I've struggled with Hadassah over the years, like your brother.
My mother.
And your mother. I really liked Hadassah when I first met her because I understood that Hadassah was opening up worlds for people. And then over the years, we would meet once a year. And this, again, we can't tell you more about it or we'd have to kill you, but just imagine like some super sexy Jews in Park City, Utah with like creme brulee and free booze for the weekend. And then Amichai, or shall I say Hadassah, with lit candles everywhere and people actually opening their hearts and experiencing something profound and holy for the first time in their lives. And after many years, I started to realize that I liked you more than Hadassah.
Me too.
Yeah, and you say something in the movie when you said it became clear that she's not me. And I felt like I want more Amichai. Like I want less Hadassah and more Amichai, because I feel, and now I can see it in the arc of your story, that you were discovering who Amichai was through Hadassah. And at some point you became the more interesting character, right? So I felt that. I felt like, oh, I like her, but I love him. I love him, and I want to know what you think. Like, what's really, so you speak and you have this scene with Rabbi Ingber from Romemu about the mask and what the mask hides and what the mask reveals. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit more about the device of revealing and concealing as you yourself were in the act of discovery?
So Sandy and I were just talking about that outside, but Hadassah was born literally on the holiday of Purim, which, as many of you might know, and if you don't, is the holiday once a year where we go upside down. It is the carnival, it's the topsy-turvy, it's the ancient Jewish invitation, probably inspired by an earlier Persian holiday, where you're allowed to go upside down. You might drink too much, you might cross-dress, you might reveal the truth that otherwise is not revealed. You do what the court jester does, which is tell truth to power through the twist. And that's the purpose of Purim, which is on many levels a lovely, fun holiday. It also deals with the biggest skeletons in our closet that include racism, and include trauma, and include many other forms of persecutions on all sides of our story. And that is the night in which we can actually touch the horror through the levity. And I stumbled on Hadassah. We both, on some level, started our careers at B'nai Jeshurun in New York by asked to do Purim. And I just got to New York and I discovered the radical fairies and gay culture, and I did a bit of drag before, and I thought, this is the night. And she showed up, literally, with several vodka tonics. I was out of the building, she showed up, and she came complete. And over the years, this character only showed up on Purim. It was like shamanic ritual drag. And I would watch the videos of her later, and she said things that I did not know that I know. And it felt numinous and otherworldly and healing. And I think what it did to me was it gave me the permission, which I talk about in the film, to be very publicly queer, to be very publicly religious, to blur it all together, and to just have fun. And people will come to me later and said we were, whether it was Havdalah at Reboot or Purim in Jerusalem or New York or Warsaw, and they said for the first time we felt liberated to be interested in a religious ritual without having to feel obligated, because it was also a drag show. In that in-between, something opened up. So for me, that opened up the possibility of what is my voice in all this. And there was a moment after some years where, I will just say, my mother, who's 95 and has seen this film and blesses it, has a love-hate relationship with Hadassah, partially jealousy because of Hadassah's look. Although my mother did give Hadassah one of her fur coats that she doesn't use anymore. She's like, Hadassah will use it. But my mother said to me, if you're serious about your career as a rabbi, I would advise you to maybe let go of Hadassah. And I poo-pooed it, but then I thought, she's right. For me to go do what I wanted to do politically, and to talk about where I am in the notion of intermarriage, or to be really a thoughtful leader inside the Jewish mechanism, I would always be the drag queen, which is a good thing, but also a limiting thing. So at some point I had to let her go. It was a sacrifice. She's still in the Dead Sea, trying to deliver the feminine divine from the clutches of patriarchy. She might come back. It's not up to me. But she had to go for me to show up.
One of the questions that your brother asks repeatedly throughout the film is, where are the boundaries? Where are the boundaries? And I'm really curious to hear your thoughts. And maybe, I'll ask both of you, because Sandi, you also have been an Orthodox Jew at various times, and you're quasi-Orthodox Jew. And I think a lot about boundaries, and I wonder, you are an Ivri in every sense of the word. You are a boundary crosser, and yet you also chose JTS, which is also where I went to seminary some years before you did. You chose it precisely because it was boundaried, right? So I'm curious if you can share a little bit about how you think about the answer today to your brother's question about where the boundaries are.
We come from different backgrounds, but I think it's no accident that we met in the same place at the Jewish Theological Seminary of the conservative movement, because to an extent still, it was certainly the case when you were there, when I was there, I think the conservative movement, as it is evolving, as all of Jewry and everything is evolving now, contains a middle ground between adherence to the past in a very rigid way and openness to the present and future in a very fluid way by maintaining a boundary. I decided to go to JTS because in 2006, the movement famously passed the law that would enable LGBT students to become rabbis. And the thorough process by which the movement went through this process and came up with a decision impressed me so much that this is a place that my Orthodox ancestry and my Flexidox reality can meet. And I wanted to know the data and know the boundaries so I can figure out where I tweak them, but to come from knowledge, and especially to know Jewish law. I decided to make the decision I did over intermarriage precisely from deeply exploring the boundaries and realizing that actually the goalposts shift. That the goalposts that were so solid for our ancestors 100 or 500 or 1,000 years ago are a little different today, right? You're a woman rabbi. I'm an openly gay rabbi. That wasn't the case 100 years ago. The goalposts have shifted for who's in leadership, right? In your congregation and in mine, women count in the quorum. That wasn't the case 50 years ago. Still is not the case for so many of world Jews. So what does it mean to know what the limits are, to respect the boundaries because they are protecting the sacred, but know that they are fluid and come to them with respect. And not just kick open the goalposts, but say, I'm just gonna little gently move you because we're not where we were. So it is an ongoing dance, which I know you and I in discussion over some issues and others, and all of our colleagues, there are quite a few rabbis and leaders in the room. I think we're at a moment in the 21st century where we are looking tradition in the eye, in the rear view mirror, but also figuring out what does it mean to navigate a complete new landscape that makes sense and speaks to who we are.
So Amichai and I had this interesting moment when we were in Park City some year, maybe, I don't know, 5 or 8 or 10 years in, and we sat down to do a little Torah study together, as one does in Park City with the creme brulee. And when we took out the text, if you recall.
I don't, but you will.
So I put on a kippah and Amichai took off his hat. And it was interesting. Like at the time I was wearing a kippah whenever I would study Torah. And you felt that the way to honor text study would be to remove a head covering, and I felt like it was to put one on. It's interesting to see us sitting here today. I mean, right, exactly. Here's Amichai with the kippah on. We recognized in that moment that we came from totally different worlds. I grew up in the suburbs in Short Hills, New Jersey, a secular Jew, and you came from this dynasty, of rabbis, and we sort of were meeting in this interesting place. And I felt over and over again over the last 20 years, as long as I've known you, 25 years, that we have landed very close, and we're not exactly the same, but we're very close. Our communities, IKAR and Shul, are so different, but very similar in terms of the way that we look at the world, the way we want Judaism to feel, full of joy, full of honesty, full of passion. We don't want it to be perfunctory. Like those things are very similar. And some of the hardest things, and some of the hardest things in the film, we've also come out very close to one another. And that has to do with Israel and Israel-Palestine. And I feel that some of what you're describing with the gvul, with the boundary, is also true when it comes to this very difficult conversation about how to hold a very deep love for our Jewish family and a sense of responsibility to and accountability to our family in Israel, and also beyond devastated by the deaths of Palestinian innocents for whom this nightmare is not over. And I really so deep. I see you as so much as a brother and as a friend. Once Amichai and I did an interview together, and we both started to cry, and we hugged so hard that one of my ribs broke. But that really, truly.
Oh my gosh.
I couldn't laugh for 6 weeks, which was my punishment. But I feel so deeply grateful for your voice in this moment, your public voice, that you, from the beginning, we were together in that scene when you're in Tel Aviv at Hostage Square, right in the aftermath, and I was there 2 weeks after, and you walked me through, I think you had just shot it, and then, and I just have witnessed you're constantly sharing with the world the struggle that you are having to hold the complexity of this moment, and to try to articulate a new language of how to both be in something and outside something at the same time. And that is so profound, Amichai. It's a gift that you've given all of us to witness how someone could be so deeply within and also brave enough to be without. And I just want to thank you for that publicly. And I want to thank you, Sandi, for capturing that, because putting this at the end of the film is so, it feels like it's so critical. Everything you're trying to communicate about interfaith marriage, about the family line, about the discourse, it is really, this is where the rubber hits the road when it comes to Israel-Palestine. And I love that we got a little taste of that in this film, not just from now, but from all the way back to 2014. But I want to thank you for that, and maybe you can reflect a little bit on that last piece and how you navigated what to include and what not to include as you decided to put the close to the film in this difficult moment.
I mean, every image in this film is a minefield. Every word in this film is a minefield. Everything was so delicately, sensitively considered, Talmudically debated. I mean, our editing room was a yeshiva. And it took 6 years. I mean, we in fact did an editing masterclass about the process of editing this morning here, which is not being done for any other film right now. But it's because this was such a delicate and sensitive weave of Amichai's strands, and also just structurally, filmically, narratively, biblically, how to weave this together. And that was the ending. Took months for 2 minutes, because we had to get it right. And we couldn't. And we do have some people who say to us, I love the film, I hate the last 2 minutes. Why did you put it in the film? We have many people who say, thank you for the last 2 minutes. And my favorite response is, I love the film, I hate the last 2 minutes, but I'm still recommending it to all my friends. The discomfort. But yes, we were going to finish the film in the fall. And then it was very clear once October 7th happened that, we were back and forth about this has to be in the movie, and how do we do it? And that went through a number of iterations.
So I want to say that this is extremely fragile and very delicate. I don't know all of you, where you're from, who you are, Jewish, Jewish, Jew-adjacent, where you are on the Israel-Palestine storyline. As somebody who grew up in Israel, who goes back and forth to Israel all the time, whose family is there, whose friends are there, who has many Palestinian friends, and who is involved deeply in the peace work for many, many years. When I arrived in Israel shortly after October 7th, and we met at this complete raw trauma, I called Sandi and said, this has to be in it. And I don't know how, and I don't know what we're gonna say, but I can't imagine us being in the world with this film that talks about the first 2 decades of the 21st century and doesn't address where we are. We didn't know where it's gonna go. We assumed it's not gonna be good, and the horror of October 7th was so fresh and bleeding, and we're still there. And so we agreed, and then we filmed that day in Tel Aviv, and then 2 months later there was a 2-minute cut, and it was just around this time of year, it was like a little later in December, and I was in Jerusalem sitting with my brother Benny looking at that cut. And what I'm saying there originally is I'm standing here with the pain of my family and friends, but it doesn't justify the occupation and what's about to happen in Gaza. And I watched it and I say, it can't say but. It has to say and. This is not a but situation. This is not an either or. This is a both and. We are in this together, and the only future, I believe, for the prosperity and peace and safety and security of Israelis and Palestinians is a both and. Yes. However that looks, I'm not getting to the political solutions right now, but it has to be a both and where we're both seen in our full humanity and respected and regarded as people worthy of life. And my brother, whose political views are not exactly the same as mine and is struggling mightily to be there for his family and community, agreed that he blessed this movie, and he said the sense of solidarity needs to be a little more pronounced. And so to Sandi and team's credit, they're like, okay, change it. And then it was New Year's Eve, and I was in Jerusalem, and I had a fever, and I was on my phone, and I kept recording and, like figure out the right and tone that means this and that's where we are now, and it's finished, but it's not finished. These conversations and the many we're having are a continuation of this conversation. How do we find the path to the middle, to the and, to the future? And I want to say, Sharon, in this public sphere of our conversation, that you are my first go-to on most Sundays to hear your sermon from IKAR. And over these past many tough months, our friendship and your commitment, unwavering commitment to justice and to nuance and to love has been a remarkable inspiration to everybody, so many, and to you. And I'm sorry about the rib. Right, I'm remembering.
He's a very hard hugger.
I know. It was
an
very
emotional
well
moment. You know, it's your brother says at one point. We're gonna take just a couple of questions in a moment, but your brother says at one point, "My brother is my teacher. He's taken us on a very long journey." He says, and he's my teacher. And I'm just thinking about, you know, your name, Amichai, my people lives, my nation lives, and carrying the weight of that and the privilege and the opportunity of that, and all of the people, the thousands and thousands of people who you have brought closer to our tradition because you were willing to speak about it and sing about it and dance about it, and like in a different way. And it feels, it's so profound. I mean, I remember many years ago, Amichai and I were at some conference together, not in Park City, Utah. And you told the story about the radical fairies that I don't know if you remember telling, but we were asked by the moderators, what was a moment of radical welcoming that you've experienced? And you shared that I remember you were walking up the hill to your first radical fairies gathering, and they just welcomed you with love. And you spoke about it so beautifully, and I thought, I want Shul to feel like that. I want Shabbat to feel like radical love. And so you planted these seeds, and they're growing in the most beautiful way in places you have no idea about. And it feels like such a blessing to the memory of your father, who says, you know, who's like the layers of this is your heritage, and don't ever let go of this. And in some ways you took this roundabout path, but it ended up only honoring your legacy and the legacy of your family. And I hope you feel that deeply. I think I certainly see that and feel that, and this film only makes it even more apparent. So I really thank you for that. I would love if we have just a couple of comments, and then we'll close tonight.
And then we're happy to talk more outside.
We do. Okay, so should I pick, or